Hi there, you guys. Welcome. We're so excited that you wanted to join us today to talk a little bit about 5G, how this fits into communities, and is it an answer for the digital divide? We're going to dig into some truths and also some myths about 5G. And today I'm really excited that we get to talk to some experts. We are going to start by talking to Roger Timmerman from Utopia Fiber. And I'm going to start with you just to talk a little bit about your work, and then we'll turn it over to Bob Knight. So starting with Roger, can you tell us a little bit about what you do, how you got to Utopia, and then we'll dig into the technology.
Yeah, so maybe a little on Utopia and then I guess a little on me and how I ended up here. But Utopia, we're basically a group of communities in Utah that did not want to get into this business. This was, in their words, a kind of a last resort. They had a lot of problems with getting broadband connectivity, couldn't get the incumbents to upgrade, offered incentives and programs and things like that, and just couldn't get the connectivity they felt that was becoming critical to their communities. And they just felt that everyone should have access to high speed broadband, and that they would have to do something to make that happen. And that says, oh yeah, that sounds obvious that communities would have that opinion. This was back in 2000, and they created the entity in 2002. And so we were talking about dial-up and maybe some other just emergent things, and they had that vision and needed that connectivity. They created Utopia in 2004. They bonded for some projects. It went well in the sense they built a lot of good network out there and the service was good, but it didn't do so well. And then things really picked up in about 2009. We did some restructurings and new programs, and we've even grown the partnership of cities. And so now we've come a long ways. We've got about 15 cities with fiber to the home and 50 cities with some fiber in these communities. We partner with all sorts of organizations, whether it's educational, the states, the county, there's a lot of partners in this. And now we have about 34,000 or so active connections on the network, cover about 120,000 addresses across all these different cities. It's the largest open access network in the country, which is pretty cool. What that means is that we don't provide services. So we build this, we're a community. We don't really want to be internet providers, but we build fiber infrastructure and we let the companies that out there, the private companies, come in and use it, and they compete with each other, and it drives down pricing. They have to do promotions. They have to answer the phone when somebody calls and complains, or else somebody's going to get frustrated and switch. And so we have this incredibly competitive market in Utah. I think it's the most competitive in the country because we do still have the incumbent providers with cable and telephone, and we have some wireless providers. It's kind of a desert here, so they do pretty well with coverage and things like that. But we have, these 13 different companies that use our fiber to sell to residential customers, and even more on the business side. It's incredibly competitive. But it all works. So that's what Utopia does. It's a governmental entity. It's really just a lot of ways to describe it as a consortium of cities. Technically or legally, it's an interlocal entity. But that's who we are. I ended up here. I've been doing this a little bit longer than just Utopia. My background was in being a geek. It was in information technology, and so I was doing computers and networks and things like that. I came out of BYU, Brigham Young University in Provo, with my education with a bachelor's and master's. And really, I saw some of these communities out there looking to do community fiber. I thought this was amazing. At that time, it was Provo City. So I was one of the network engineers on that Provo City fiber network, which is now one of the Google fiber networks out there. And so I worked there for a number of years. And I've been around. I went and worked in a technical role at Utopia after that. I was the CTO here. I left and I went and did wireless for a few years. And so that's where I got introduced to a lot of the new technologies out there and worked with those, even did some 5G deployments in some different areas, and a lot of kind of future type technologies with phased array antennas and stuff that's not so future anymore, but at the time was and still is pretty new. And we deployed some networks very successfully with that. And then Utopia was kind of trying to decide what it wanted to do. And made it, some other things kind of fell apart. I'll just put it that way. And I came back and said, hey, let's just get this thing done. And was really excited to see the goal this entity come to fruition and complete the build out of all of these communities and really ramp things up. And so I came back and have been the executive director, the guy in charge, with the guy that everybody throws the tomatoes at too. But it's a great place to be. And it's going really well. And I've been here in that role for about 4.5 years. So that's kind of how I've bounced around a little bit.
Well,
Well,
I'm excited that you're willing to embrace the tomatoes in the story. And I think that that's part of what makes Utopia the part of your history, and it being something that's very hopeful for a lot of communities that are essentially saying, how are we going to do this? And we're not sure if we can convince people to get on board, and we might have to, lock arms and do it ourselves. If you could tap into your inner geek, but to also put this in plain language for people, tell us what exactly is 5G technology and how it's different from 4G.
So 5G, it's the next evolution. I make the joke, 25G or 5G is 25% more G than 4G, right? Which is just a geek joke and numbers joke, but because it doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people. They're just like, it's just the next thing. But this is a pretty big jump in technology. There's a lot of things, it's taking these different technologies that have come about and combining them and releasing a new generation of technology for wireless that brings better speeds. It can take advantage of things like carrier aggregation and adding different bands and spectrums together and aggregating that. We also have millimeter wave frequencies that in the past have all considered to be garbage frequencies. And the reason for that is they don't go very far. They're higher frequency, but they don't go through things and they don't go very far. And what was considered garbage is now they said, with all of these antenna technologies and things, we can take advantage of some of that. But the trade-off is we got to get closer to people. And so you see different carriers, say, well, what is this carrier doing? And it's different. We see some of the carriers taking advantage more of the millimeter wave frequencies in aggregation with, their other lower frequencies. And if you've got a better signal, it goes way better. And if you're in a worse area, it's going to be a little bit more like a 4G or LTE type experience. So that's one of the features of 5G is it's not incredibly consistent what that experience is going to be like everywhere, because it's a lot more dependent on the environment that you're in. And so, some of the trials out there, people are like, hey, this looks really good when I get this amazing speed when I can see that tower, and then I'll turn around and my body's in the way and I don't get the same signal. And it really is that volatile. But the nice thing is it can still fall back to what's at least an LTE type experience. So it's, and that's what happens with small cell is they say, well, if we can't go as far and we need better signals, we've got to put those antennas closer to people. And so 5G isn't exactly synonymous with small cell isn't exactly synonymous with 5G. But they're related in the sense that if you want to take advantage of those millimeter wave frequencies, you want to put fewer people per tower and give them a better speed, you've got to get closer to those people. But it also means we're not going to see none of the small cell stuff in rural areas and places where you don't have a lot of congestion. So you get some of the benefit of the technology, but not so much the benefit of the small cell deployment in more rural and suburban areas even. So 5G is a more flexible thing. It has capabilities, but it's not just when you get your phone and it says 5G on there, you're not going to be able to just assume you're going to get these gigabit-like speeds. It's going to be incredibly dependent on where you happen to be relative to that smallest tower or that nearest tower.
Thanks for walking us through that. And now what I want to do is I want to pick up on a few of the threads that you said about explaining the technology, and we're going to turn to Bob Knight. Now, Bob has had experience as not only a local official, but also working with private stakeholders to really help people understand what can 5G do in your community. So can you tell us a little bit about your work? And then also, as a second part to that, how is this going to change quality of life for your residents?
Sure. So thanks, Francella. Very, very interesting subject to discuss, and it's a little bit controversial at the local level. So So Bob Knight, I'm a partner at a public relations firm called Harrison Edwards. We do a lot of economic development, healthcare, and fiber broadband work. Do a lot of work in the industry. And I'm also a public official in my hometown of Richfield, Connecticut, where I sit in my basement today. Thank you, pandemic.
Yes.
And, you know, I'm going to tell you the story how I became a public official here. In fact, tonight, if all goes well, I'll be reappointed for my 6th term on the commission. But this was probably about 15 years ago. My wife, there was some community event, and I was pushing the baby in the stroller. Baby who's now 16 and driving, and there was a woman who's running for state representative who was on our board of selectmen, which is a fancy New England term for town council. And I asked her, I said, "Oh, what platform are you running on?" You know, striking up a conversation. She said, "Economic development." And we did a lot of economic development work, you know, professionally. So I said to her, so, you know, well, what does that mean? Are you looking to bring more transit-oriented development, green development, you know? And, you know, deer in the headlights looked right back. And she said, "We have an opening on our Economic Development Commission. We need you." And I tell that story, and, you know, it's kind of funny, but really shows that local officials really don't necessarily understand economic development, and they certainly don't understand a lot of infrastructure, wireless infrastructure, broadband infrastructure. It sort of runs the spectrum, runs the gamut. We talk about this a lot, Francella, the level of understanding. And so, you know, I was really eager to participate in today's conversation because, you know, hoping to level set for public officials, you know, what 5G is going to mean to the community, what some of the challenges are going to be, and what you're going to come up against. So in Connecticut, every 10 years, we're required by the state to update our community's plans of conservation and development. We do that it's our 10-year plan for each municipality. And then one is done regionally. We don't have county government in Connecticut, but we do have COGs, these councils of governments. So one's done at the COG level and one's done at the local level. And I was really shocked when we had some public meetings for not necessarily at the local level, but at the regional level. 5G kept coming up over and over and over again from just, you know, average citizens. They were getting letters from AT&T saying, "We're siting a small cell in your community. Warning, could be hazardous to your health. Stay at least, you know, 1 foot away," or whatever. And people were confused. And there's so much misinformation out there on the internet. For every study that you find that says that 5G is safe, you find another study that says it's not safe, especially pertaining to millimeter wave technology. So, you know, I was sort of watching from the crowd and watching how the elected officials who sit on the COG were handling this, and they really didn't know what to do. And so when you have a situation where, you know, there's confusion and uncertainty, no one wants to move forward when you're an elected. And, you know, there's every conspiracy theorist is out there, but, you know, also the carriers are also out there touting that, you know, 5G is going to, you know, cure cancer, or, you know, you're going to do all sorts of surgeries and you know, connected cars, connected this, connected that. And they're not helping the situation either, because they're not really messaging it the right way. They're making these big promises that they probably can't deliver on for the reasons that Roger had articulated. So there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace. And the real question is, you know, that our officials, and I should mention that my thoughts and opinions are my own and do not reflect those of the administration, you know, that I serve under, or any of the elected officials in the community. But, you know, where do we go from here? Do we allow it? And what sparked a lot of the conversation, and I'm going to share you know, something on the screen here, is last January. I don't know if you can see this. I'll move my cursor over it. This is a small cell, and it's attached to a pole. This is right on my street. Our town, where Richfield is located, we're a suburban community of New York City. We're sort of like the last suburb before you get to the exurbs. We're, you know, a leafy, fairly upscale community. And, you know, if you're a carrier, you're going to want to be in Richfield, you know, especially if you're, you know, because you can command higher rates and whatnot. So very early on, all of a sudden one day, I was driving home and I noticed there were a ton of these small cells on poles, and in a span of about 48 hours, a carrier, we still don't know who it is. We think this is Frontier, but we're not 100% sure. Basically blanketed the entire town, 24,000 people. I forget the square mileage, with these small cells. And as local officials were saying, well, wait a second, we have no idea what's up on our poles. We don't know what this is. We know we're getting hammered by the community saying 5G isn't safe. You know, we don't have this level of expertise. What's going on? Oh, and PS, by the way, thanks to some FCC rulings, we have no say in it whatsoever. So it's caused a whole mess, at the local level, and certainly at the COG level, as we're all trying to figure out what's the next step forward, especially in the era of pandemic. Here's the small cell, by the way. And by the way, there's no fiber on these lines. Here's a splicing box, and here's the small cell, attached to the pole. So it's really caused a real mess, and we're trying to figure out what to do. Do we want 5G? Do we want fiber connectivity? And we know that remote working is here, and it's here to stay. And we know that our networks are at capacity right now. So we have a lot of decisions to make, and what's on the internet and what's being shared in terms of propaganda, both at the state legislature and at the local levels, isn't really helping matters very much at all.
And Roger, I want to ask you about a question, because something that Bob's bringing up about what people see on TV versus what this is actually going to do for residents. So if I, for example, I'm watching a commercial and it says, you're going to get 5G on whatever phone you have, you can sign up for 5G. Is that true? And if it's not true, where are we really going to see 5G applications?
Yeah, the applications of 5G are way overhyped. 5G is really good at what it's good at, and it's really bad at what it's bad at. And so I think it's important to understand what are its strengths, what are its purposes, and what are they not. And I would just contrast it with what I call, and maybe a lot of people call, fiber connected Wi-Fi. Fiber connected Wi-Fi basically is, you're in a building. It may be a home, it may be your office or something like that. It has a fiber connection, and you have Wi-Fi, and that Wi-Fi has also gotten really, really, really fast. The good thing about Wi-Fi is it's designed specifically to cover every room and every space with as many people as you have, and it's all free and unlimited and use as much as you want, right? And you pay for your fiber connection. That's unlimited, super fast, awesome. Why in the world would you ever be using 5G in the middle of a building? 5G doesn't go very well to the middle of a building. It definitely doesn't work in a basement or other things like that. So when you're in a place that has any sort of connectivity or infrastructure, you're going to have a better option than 5G. 5G doesn't work well indoors, inside buildings and things. It works a little bit. You make phone calls really well.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to see those 5G speeds that they talk about, like gigabit, those tiers, inside of the Costco, for example, right? You can barely make a phone call in Costco. It's a metal shell, right? So 5G is really good. When I'm between locations, I'm in my car, I'm on a walk, or I'm exercising, or I'm camping in some areas if they've got coverage, or just out and about, mobile wireless. 5G is the next, evolution of mobile wireless. But if you're not mobile, it's terrible. It's not an end all for every type of connectivity we need. And so when they, you see an example of, like, here's doctors, performing surgery or saving, dealing with cancer patients or something, and 5G is going to help this. I'm like, I sure hope that hospital has better connectivity than 5G. I don't want my doctors dependent on the 5G signal if they're operating on me. It'd be terrible. So
well, let me ask you this. So the thing is, if we're talking about in general, your position is that it's not necessarily great for residential applications. Is it better for enterprise applications? Is that where we're gonna see its strength?
No, only if it's a mobile application. If it's fixed, like if this is a big shiny enterprise building, they better not be putting their stuff on the 5G network. It would be garbage, because everything in that entire building would be connected to the same small cell. That small cell is also providing connectivity to everybody else in that neighborhood. There's not enough capacity. You come with fiber to an enterprise, I mean, you got 10 gig dedicated to just that business, or even 100 gig. I mean, you could do more than that with fiber. So, it just isn't a fit for even home use or enterprise use. It's a fantastic evolution of benefit for mobile purposes. And so, driving cars and things out and about, it's awesome. But even for the home, I mean, you think about the use case for them, they're trying to sell you a 5G connection to a mobile device. They're selling it to you for 50 to $80 or something like that. And expecting you to use it so much, right? And they're going to have so many people back to every tower using mobile devices and paying for these subscriptions. And you do certain things on a phone. You don't use it the same as you do your home connection. You don't consume as much bandwidth. And so they can put hundreds of devices on a tower and they say it works and it's fast and it's great. At my house, though, I think about my house. I just did an exercise the other day and counted over 100 devices that I have in my house that all connect to my network. And maybe I'm more than normal because I'm a geek, but it's not the same thing to take 100 devices and then aggregate them all and then put that connection on the 5G network. The 5G networks don't have enough capacity for that. So if you think of neighborhoods of homes, with each of those homes with 100 devices in each one of them, 5G is not anywhere close to meeting that demand. But if those homes have cable or fiber or whatever, and then put all their devices on those connections, that's more capacity than 5G has to deliver those homes. But then when you're out and about, that's where a connection to your house doesn't do you any good, and you need that 5G service for the mobile connectivity.
So
I was going to ask you, what does this conversation reflect what you would have with maybe, I don't know, people in your hometown or even when you're talking to clients?
Well, I think Roger articulated the essence of the issue that we're having here. That's the conversation that's not happening at the state legislatures. That's the conversation that's not happening with local officials. So 5G is being touted as the next Pandora's box of awesomeness, right? It's going to bridge the digital divide. It's going to get into public housing. It's going to help the school kids. It's going to help anyone who's not connected. It's going to solve the MDU issue. And so, very well-intended state legislators are working on policy in several states right now to enable, more, that benefits the carriers, benefits 5G. It doesn't benefit the community. And what Roger articulated, I think that's the source of frustration that we have, because it's 5G is not going to be a one size fits all solution. We are going to need a wired solution, as Roger just articulated. Wi-Fi indoors, enterprise solutions with fiber or fiber to the home, and 5G for mobile devices. It's not an either or, it's an and type of conversation, and that's the essence of the issue.
So even thinking about something that you just said, that you need proximity to the fiber wire line, right? So the thing is, how many communities actually have proximity? So we also have to essentially think about who's actually going to get access to 5G. So in your estimation, who is this going to benefit, and how soon will they be able to actually enjoy 5G in all of its promise, not just what it is right now?
Yeah, so I think there's going to be a dramatic benefit in very dense urban environments, because the wireless networks are overwhelmed there, right? And so you'll see the wireless carriers doing a lot of 5G deployment, both the technology and the small cell approach in those dense urban environments. And they're dysfunctional today from a connectivity perspective, and they'll be like, okay, well now your things are starting to work okay on your mobile devices, but you probably still are going to want a fiber connection to your residents and your businesses. Out in the suburban areas and even rural, it's even worse, where it's like, it's just a waste of money for the carriers to deploy small cell as you get further and further out. And so, we see some of it on the fringe of urban areas going into suburban, but I mean, the official, like, this is 5G deployed at small cell, I mean, you're not going to see that I don't know if we'll see it ever. I mean, that, again, I'd look at them and say, well, why in the world would they be deploying that in a suburban neighborhood? It doesn't have the range, at small cell to cover the neighborhoods, because the homes are too spread apart, and it doesn't have the capacity to provide what they need, because you're still sharing all of these homes in these areas back to an aggregated point. And that's another big problem with it is, we go in there and do by default, we install a fiber connection to a house. Most people sign up for gig, but some people sign up for 10 gig. And that is very future proof and works great. But then on the wireless side, they've got that sort of connectivity if they're lucky for a whole tower. So I mean, what are you gonna do? Put hundreds of homes with each of their hundreds of devices aggregating back to something that has less capacity than we can provide to one house with fiber? I mean, it's not like, even at full deployment, it doesn't come anywhere near to the capacity that fiber has directly to the homes. And it just doesn't even work from a practical perspective. Just, the density and deployment of rural homes and suburban. It's like, are you going to put them on every light pole? And I mean, the amount of money that they would have to spend to do that in suburban and rural areas, it's more expensive than to just build these fiber networks to the homes, and yet isn't as good. So, I mean, I consider myself a fan of 5G, but again, it's 5G where it makes sense and with reasonable expectations. I mean, that's where people think, oh, this is going to be fantastic. I'll have gigabit speeds or multiple gigabit speeds everywhere, and it'll be unlimited, and it'll be free, and it'll be reliable. And it's like, it's not any of those things.
And when we're thinking about something, Bob, that Roger brought up, even the return on the investment argument, just thinking about the fact that 5G will likely serve, urban communities better than it might rural communities, where it's going to cost, thousands of dollars per small cell versus maybe $50 per small cell in an urban area. So when we're thinking about that and how this rollout would happen across the country, do you worry that by the time 5G comes to certain neighborhoods, we will have moved on to another technology, considering how long it's taken to roll out 4G?
So that's something that folks we hear that joke all the time. By the time we get 5G, we're going to be on to 10G or whatever the case may be. And the answer is yes. And I think we just need to be smart about it and stop throwing our money at these sort of quote unquote solutions that come by all the time. Let's just do the right thing. Let's deploy fiber, as much fiber, everywhere as we can. We can build 5G networks on top of it. I'm not one of the people who sits around and is super concerned about 5G health concerns. I think that the issues come in the millimeter wave area, and you really have to have a lot of exposure to that, and you have to be really, really close, is my understanding. And I think let's do it. It's an either or. Our economy needs it. We need to bridge the digital divide. It's going to open up a lot of opportunities and a lot of possibilities. But when we deploy 5G, let's have an adult conversation. Let's get the carriers together. Let's get the local officials together, and let's talk. What does this mean for the community? How's the deployment going to look? Because we don't want to be impeding progress, but we also have to answer to to our constituents, and that's a really important piece. And if half the constituents are saying, hey, this is going to cause tumors, and it's going to cause learning disabilities and interrupt bird migration, and we're really upset about this, we're not going to give you the green light. And that's carriers, I think, have to sort of get away from themselves, get out of the corporate culture, and say, okay, here's the data, here's the facts, and do a better job in terms of community relations, really getting out into the community and messaging that.
In my last few minutes, I do want to make sure that local officials who are essentially saying, like you said, we want to have a reasonable conversation about this. We don't want to stand in the way, but we're even thinking about what questions do you ask? And I think that, again, some of the local officials that are working on small cell deployment, overall 5G strategies, are in the weeds on this issue, but some, quite frankly, aren't and don't have the resources to get the expertise that they need to make informed decisions. And very often they're relying on what providers or even sometimes lobbyists are telling them about 5G. So in our last 2 minutes, Roger, if I could turn to you first, what is your advice to local officials who are working on these issues and really thinking about the questions that they need to ask to stand up for their constituents?
Yeah, I would want every community, I think they should have a plan for their community, what they're going to do for broadband. And when you're looking at 5G, it's really, well, this fits some of my needs, but not all of them. I mean, if they think, you ask someone, what are you going to do about broadband to people's homes and to your businesses and to your schools? If the answer is 5G, then they don't understand what 5G is. So yes, we want to promote 5G, but that's complementary to fiber or some other broadband infrastructure. And if you put fiber in the ground that enables 5G, and 5G enables certain applications that you can't do with fiber, obviously fiber is not very mobile, but they're complementary to each other and they don't replace each other. So if you have a really good 5G strategy and you don't have a strategy for broadband at your homes and businesses, you totally missed the ball here. And so you need to have both plans and both strategies, and they can be complementary to each other.
That's great. And Bob, I'm going to give you the last word. Even when you're thinking about something that you said earlier about the conversations that are not only happening at local, but also state levels, what's your advice to local officials who are essentially feeling like they are taking on the state and even sometimes the FCC on an issue that has a direct impact on quality of life for their residents?
Well, I think it's time for the fiber broadband industry to grow up a little bit, right? We've sort of been kind of like this alt culture type of group. We've done things kind of a little bit in a quirky way, and it's time for us to come together. Roger's colleague Kim McKinley and I were the national co-chairs of the Fiber Broadband Association's Public Officials Work Group, and we're there to be a network to talk about these issues. About 5G, about economic development, building stuff on top of these networks. Next Century Cities, does similar things, and probably at a much deeper level. Get together, form that network. Let's start talking in a common voice. Let's get our voices up to the state legislatures. Let's get our voices, up to DC, and let's have a better understanding of what the policy is here. But when you think of all the municipalities in the country, thousands, right? Hundreds of thousands, probably. There's probably someone out there who has been through this before and who can give you some pretty good advice. So I think that's the first best step. Create your network, and then the answers will sort of stem from there.
Well, I want to do a plug for the Fiber Broadband Association. This is one of the reports on my desk. I read as much as I possibly can. This was actually a very good report, especially on collecting information, especially in light of COVID. And I also just want to thank you guys for being able to be a part of this conversation. We talk to local officials across the country, and usually they are focused on just making sure that everyone has a baseline connectivity. This conversation has now ramped up to, if we don't all have some sort of baseline connectivity, this affects everyone in aggregate. So I'm really excited that we get to tap into thoughts from experts like you guys, and we'll continue to use you as a resource. And for all of you who joined us today, I hope that you got a little bit of information on what was fact versus fiction about 5G. And we're really excited to be a part of the Mountain Connect conference this year. Thank you.